Hey, welcome to the latest episode of The Voices of eCommerce. I'm John Drake, professor of Management Information Systems at East Carolina University. In this podcast, I interview the incredible people behind the scenes of e-commerce, the people that design, build, market, and run various online, mobile, and social initiatives. And now, on with the show. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Voices of e-commerce. We're here today with Harry Hawk, who is an instructor at, Southwestern Community College District in Chula Vista, California.
Right. It's Southwestern College, and it's the local community college, part of the 114 or so in the California system.
Cool. And then you also have extensive experience, I know, in the food industry, digital marketing, and working as a consultant entrepreneur. And now you're working at as a lead generator at Bird Eye, and what was the other place you mentioned?
A few years ago, I was working at Bird Eye, and I'm now working for a company called Doctible. And so I'm running the whole marketing team, but really responsible for bringing in leads for the sales team.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit, what do you do with that?
How I generate the leads, or how do I hand them off?
Well, both. Let's do that.
As sort of a full funnel, full stack marketer, there's all the components that we see in e-commerce, except that we don't actually sell online.
Okay.
So
what do you sell? Let's maybe start there.
So what Doctible does is it works with local practitioners in the medical and dental space.
Okay.
And it helps them with two things. It helps them with online reputation management, which really these days is largely Google My Business and all the reviews that can be generated. And then we're a patient engagement platform. And this directly relates to e-commerce. Consumers today, they've been to Amazon, they've been to all these great e-commerce sites where everything's simple and easy. And then you want to schedule an appointment with your doctor. Oh, call us, leave us a voicemail. We won't answer it. We'll leave you a voicemail. You won't answer it. And so we offer them ways of engaging with the patients, HIPAA compliant two-way texting, and also some email campaigns if you're send out holiday greetings and stuff, and all kinds of online scheduling and reminders, and even traffic notifications to help folks get that same kind of Amazon seamless experience,
right?
Right from their doctor.
Okay. And so you say a big part of your role right now is lead generation, and then handing that off once you have those leads. So tell me a little bit about the lead generation part.
So we're using HubSpot, which maybe most people know, but HubSpot, we're using both their CMS platform and their marketing hub. And so the web pages are all in HubSpot. The lead generation forms are there. We do some bit of processing on them to kind of validate the leads just a little bit. And then we send them off to the sales team. They have their own.
Sorry to interrupt. So for someone who isn't very familiar with marketing, what is a lead?
Yeah, that's so a potential customer, right? Somebody who might be interested in buying. And so we can think of it as a series of stages, and it's no different than any other buyer journey or decision-making process where maybe you're going to buy a new car. You're thinking about buying a new car. You're definitely going to buy a new car. Now you got to figure out where you're going to buy it from. It's the same sort of thing. A lead is someone who's potentially interested. And what we would define, what we call a marketing qualified lead, is when someone's willing to give us their information. They fill out a form on the website and say, please contact us. Once they've been further validated, they might become a sales qualified lead. Eventually, at the point that there's some additional information gathered from them, like a discovery, what they might need, what they're using now, at a certain point, they'd become a sales accepted opportunity, or just an opportunity, where at that point, the sales team has a sort of a commitment to sell a certain percentage of those.
Gotcha. And so, so the organization you're working with, is this for like a group of doctors, or is it for?
So what Doctible does, many of its customers are just your local dentist or doctor. Could be your chiropractor, your local pediatrician, your local internist. But we work with larger companies as well. So for example, in the San Diego area, we work with Scripps Mercy Physicians Partners, which is an independent physician association. So we're available to their members, or we're endorsed by the Connecticut State Dental Association, where there are 1,000 or so members have access to the product. But it's mostly just that, again, that individual relationship between Doctible and the practice.
Right, right. And so you're saying you use HubSpot for this lead generation, and they do, it said CMS, so customer management.
CMS for the content management.
Content management. I'm sorry, content management system, right? Okay.
And then there is a CRM, customer relationship management system. That is another piece of software. HubSpot does offer that, but we don't use that particular function.
Gotcha.
But, and this is, I think, important, again, throughout e-commerce and e-business, syncing different databases. I wouldn't want to be marketing, John, if you had come in and filled out the form and you were talking to the salesperson, as a marketer, I wouldn't want to interject myself into that conversation. In the same way, if you were talking with another professor, I wouldn't want to necessarily just jump in the middle of your conversation and hijack it. So it's important that we sync so that when the sales process is active, marketing might be running a few ads or something to kind of help build up the, reason for them to purchase. But generally, we're not actively communicating with them. But if they, for some reason, don't buy right now, we might nurture them through content, through ads, and through email.
Right, right. And when you say ads, you usually, I assume you're primarily referring to online ads, not.
Correct. And it's an interesting segue for a second. I'm one of the companies I've been doing some advising for is called One Screen AI. They're up in Boston. Their CEO is a friend of mine. We worked together at HubSpot years ago. He was the head of growth at their laboratory division, Sam Mulligajaran. But One Screen helps companies combine the paid ads with billboards.
Okay.
And particularly digital billboards. And what we see is just a significantly greater awareness, which actually helps lower the cost of ads on the Facebook or Google side.
Wow, interesting. And that overlap it seems to be growing. I was reading an article about augmented reality and how companies like Google are working on the ability to digitally display their own ad over a billboard ad in real life.
Wow.
Through their augmented system. So you got your camera coming in, you're like, oh yeah, there's a billboard. We're going to put our own ad there. It makes for a very interesting situation we're heading towards. So
yes, but it's at a really interesting time for sure. But yeah, on for the most part, I do Facebook and Google ads, a little bit of LinkedIn and Twitter. Historically, I've been a paid social marketer as sort of my specialty. That's changing now, I think, with all the privacy changes coming with the iOS 14 update, where Apple is changing how apps can track users and activities. Facebook's really having to rework a lot of what they do. And so I've built up my expertise in Google. I think both as a sort of a personal skill, like I don't want to be reliant totally on Facebook, and at the same time, there's some great opportunities on the larger Google platform, particularly YouTube.
Hmm. Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing some research in privacy, and particularly on what social media can do or can cause issues with privacy. So, fascinating area. Um, so you do a bit of lead generation, and you say you hand it off the the medical practices. And does your job stop there?
Well, yeah. So the medical practice are the potential customers when we get a practice that's interested, and typically it's an office manager, a medical office manager, or admin who's going to contact us. We'll hand it off to a senior sales account person. They'll contact them by phone or also by email, and see if the product is a good fit for them.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, and so yeah, that's really that lead generation part. I know a lot of people, when they think of e-commerce, they think of only things you can purchase online, but a lot of the same skill sets necessary for the lead generation aspects. And I like your story because, I mean, I try to remind people, like, you know what, the auto dealerships, they put all their cars online, but you can't buy them online. At least most dealerships don't allow that. You have to show up at the dealership to actually finish the purchase. And I think that's kind of a similar to what you're describing here. But still, that skill set of understanding the marketing and how it works digitally is extremely important for how that business works.
Absolutely. And by the way, I teach a sales course as well. And the sort of theory of that course is that, in fact, there's very few things that you can buy today that you have to buy in person, but don't have some kind of online component to them. Just like that, the auto dealership, right? Most people are not just going to head over to the dealer without doing something online, either before and or after the sale.
Right. Well, and I've talked to dealerships, and they're like, we don't make our money off of selling cars anymore. At least not much. Most of their profit comes from after sales and financing and all that. That's because they can't compete, because everyone has their cars online, and so the competitive advantage of that is now plummeted to.
And they're in for more pain because the average internal combustion car has over 1,000 moving parts, and the like a Tesla has 7 or 8, something like that.
It's not just the moving parts; it's the electronics. Which, ask me about that. I had a car sitting. We recently bought a Nissan Armada in early November. It was at the dealership for almost the first 3 months while there was an electronic problem they couldn't figure out that was scary. Making the car not start. Like, I mean, it was like, it's unusable. You couldn't start it. You got to jump, and then it would run for a couple of days, and then it would stop again. And so they it took them forever to figure out what the part was, and it's all electronics. It's not even moving. But yeah, so it's all that digital stuff, man, it gets you every time.
Yep. It's a lot of complexity. I wanted, well, did you have some other things you wanted to ask me about?
Well, I mean, I want to give you a chance to ask questions of me as well. So if you won't have anything in particular, we can move on from there.
Sure. A few things. And just as a way of introduction, I teach an eBusiness course at Southwestern, and I'm adopting your book for the fall. That's the fall 2021.
You get a thumbs up for that.
I'm excited by it. The book itself and how it's structured, I think, is appropriate. It's an introductory course, and it's much like any other kind of information product, how you right size it. I could describe e-commerce in a paragraph or in 1 or 2 pages, or we could probably write 10,000 pages. But what is the right amount of information to share with a student who's potentially going to work in the field? And so what I really liked about the book is the way you divided it into a very role centric, which becomes quickly a task centric overview of e-commerce. Obviously, each marketers, SEO specialists, system analysts, the different managers, each of them, based on their role, have different tasks that they need to perform. And I think the book goes over that, wonderfully. I'm just curious then, what led you to pick that particular structure?
Oh, now I'm going to remember and in part, I've used a lot of, or read a lot of e-commerce textbooks, and I found, similar to you, that they were they had a lot of great information, but sometimes they would go off on these tangents and have like a whole chapter on online auctions and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's, it was very detailed and things that wasn't applicable to most students when they go out into the workforce. And so I started asking myself, what would be a better approach to a textbook? And it started to occur to me. I was like, well, they're going to take on a role and they're going to work with other people in other roles. And I wrote this, and it sounds like your class might be a little bit more geared towards marketing students. Would that be?
No.
Okay.
Definitely, at least half of them are in the coming out of the computer department.
So, but my field is management information systems. So we have a very specific, we see ourselves as kind of like the interpreter between the business people and the tech people, right? We help bring them together and help design solutions that will use the technology to solve the business problem. Well, when I started thinking about that, I was like, well, we need to have the people in my class and in our program need to be able to think and put themselves in the shoes of a manager, put themselves in the shoes of a marketer, of a user, and then, yes, they still need the technical side. So they have to have the IT part of it. And so when I was thinking, I was like, why don't I just make a textbook using those specific roles? Because those are the roles they need to be able to think in terms of. And so when they are going out into the business world, they can communicate with these people because they know what are the things that are important to them. And
the vocabularies, right? That professional vocabulary.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what kind of ended up sculpting the direction of the textbook. And like I said, some of the issues with the existing textbooks, like there's a lot of great e-commerce textbooks that don't talk about user design. And to me, that was a major, major hole in a lot of these e-commerce books. And like design is an incredibly important aspect to any type of digital product that you're creating today. And in fact, a lot of businesses start with the digital design, but they just weren't talking about it, or they would make like a little footnote that, yeah, you should do this. I'm like, no, it needs to be more.
Yeah, it's a critical piece. That whole seamlessness, the speed. I'm sure you remember the early days. You'd go to an airline website, and to book a flight, you go for 3 or 4 pages, because one page you'd say where you want to go, and then the next page where you want to go back to. Now we have it's all on one easy to use form, and it's all fits into a very small amount of space, and within a few seconds you're searching for a flight.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's gotten a lot better. So yeah, so that would be what originally was the impetus of this structure for the book.
I think it's great. Part of my class, we have a big group project where we create sort of a fake website, e-commerce site for a fake company. Although it's sort of a real website, but definitely a fake company. But the goal of all of that is to talk about the different teams and to get an idea of what each of those teams does, so that, again, when they're out in the workforce and someone brings up user experience or brings up dynamic content or brings up data analytics or any of these areas, people will have my students hopefully will have some sense of it, where they can ask meaningful questions rather than sort of have a lot of consternation, a lot of concern what is that? And it's always good. It's, I think in business, people encourage everyone to ask a lot of questions. And so I don't believe that they're so-called dumb questions. I think all questions are good, but it's better when you can ask those really meaningful questions that show that you have expertise and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And people take you more seriously, and you can get more done that way. Absolutely.
So then I do have a question. So a lot of my students, as I mentioned, about half of them are coming out of the CIS department, which covers, management information systems and stuff, but also SEO, but also design, and is in that part of the school as well. And then another chunk are coming from the business entrepreneurial side. The overall school is the School of Business and Technology. But then we have, students that are coming out of hospitality or coming out of real estate or any of the other parts of the school. And I generally have sort of three wide groups of students. There's the folks that have heard about e-commerce and they've seen a lot of ads for drop shipping, and they're sort of interested in that. There's students who want to sell something online or are building a product. They're thinking about going into business, or they are in business for themselves, and they're sort of thinking about how to create a website for themselves. And that includes e-commerce. And then there's those folks who want to go out and work in the field, whether it's for a large or small company, and they know that e-commerce is going to be part of what they're going to do. Maybe because they are coming out of that technical side, they're going to be a front-end developer or something like that. I'm just curious, if you have advice about the process, not about the process of building sites, the process of going from being a student of this to becoming a practitioner, like how to put yourself out into the world. We know there's internships and things, which I'm sure you endorse, but do you have any particular suggestions or recommendations that students might use to kind of get themselves out there?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's wide open. So there's a fair, let me say here, my first piece of advice would be to just, not to steal a phrase, just do it. When I graduated from my undergrad, I don't know, some 20 odd years ago, we're not going to say a specific year, but it was right during the dot-com boom. We'll put it that way, right? My undergrad was in physics. I had one class in programming, which was Fortran. But I learned real quickly that there were no jobs for somebody with an undergrad in physics. You needed a master's or a PhD. And I wasn't opposed to that. I just didn't want to do it right at that time. I wanted to make some money. And so I said, all right, what's the biggest field growing right now? And it was web development, because it was the dot-com boom. So I went out and taught myself how to build websites. And I couldn't still get a job, though, if I had said, yeah, I had self-studied. Nobody's going to trust you. So what did I do? I started building websites for people, and I did it for free. I built a website for my uncle, who was a dentist. I built a website for a camp I worked for, and so I just went around and started I'll build you a website. Getting that experience is what you need, right? Because as you get into it, once you've done it, even if you fail the first 3 times, that 4th time, you're going to get something, right? So if you want to get into drop shipping, the best way to get started is to just pick a product and start exploring a way to sell it. And it may fail miserably, but the nice thing about drop shipping is you probably won't be out much money, because you don't owe the company any of the inventory unless you sell their products. And at least, I don't know, I haven't done drop shipping yet. I need to try that. But I did create a website where I put ads on it. I created a website where I actually put an ebook on Amazon just to see what it's like. I became an affiliate of Amazon. So I just started trying different things over these years just to see, all right, how is it done? How can I do it? And then if you find that it works, you keep pursuing further with that. So that would probably be the biggest piece of advice that I would have for students. Now, there's obviously those who like to go to the traditional route and get through a program or get a degree and then go find a job. But again, most business people who are hiring students want to see they have some experience in the area that they're being hired for. How can you show that experience? You show them a portfolio and say, here's the things I've done. Here's a link to the websites I've built. And it's a great, great way to quickly establish yourself. It's at least one of the quicker ways.
I think that's great. I think it's, in a sense, you can say, well, it's sort of like creating your own internship, helping a friend out or helping someone work on their e-commerce site. Think of it like an internship.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing wrong with doing a little volunteer work when you're still running something. I mean, I know people like to get paid. They don't like doing too much for free and you shouldn't have to, but in order to establish yourself as a professional and as an experienced in that area, sometimes you need to go that route.
I certainly agree. John, I don't have any, specific questions other than asking you this last one on just as students are using the textbook. I mean, it's very well laid out. It's very comprehensive, but do you have any recommendations as just, how to approach the book?
Yeah. I mean, and some of this will depend on how you structure your class, but there is a good reason why I put a lot of the components into it, including like the running case and chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I want to get a full case that covers all the chapters. I don't have that yet. Maybe in my next edition I will. But following that case along and reading in detail what's happening there can really help concretize a lot of the concepts that are talked about in each of those chapters. So that would be number one. Number two is, seeing when you read through a chapter, try to find examples in the real world where you see examples of that. I want this to be something that is meaningful, something that you see its purpose and efficacy when you do graduate, when you are done with this course and want to and move on. But the best way to make things real is to try to find examples like that. And so I try to provide some examples in the book, but finding your own can sometimes be far more meaningful than what I even provide. So
that's great. What I typically do, by the way, is I assign the early chapters in a book, and then as the semester wears on, I like students to pick the parts of the subsequent chapters that they want to read. Your textbook is these aren't 300-page chapters, so
right.
I think it's a lot easier to get through. But I like students to kind of find the parts that are meaningful to them.
Right.
I don't know. Forgetting about my class and the students and all that, I don't know if you wanted to talk about some other aspects of e-commerce, particularly about offline and online optimization. I don't know if that's a topic that you're familiar with or would be interested in, but I could talk about that for a few minutes if you'd like.
Yeah, actually that would be good, because I think I would say one of my holes in my knowledge is simply that I'm not an active practitioner in e-commerce. And that's one reason why I like to do these interviews with people who are, with like people like you, Harry, because you have that knowledge that I don't. I mean, yes, I help my wife with her store. I mean, she owns a wine business, or I'm sorry, a wine store where she sells bottles of wine and some craft beers and meads and ciders and seltzer and whatever else. But I helped her with that. That's my experience. And I have a couple websites where I tinker and play around with, but I don't get the good enterprise level understanding until I talk to people like you. So Yeah, tell me a little bit about this optimization of online, offline, and how do you go about doing something like that?
All right. So just give me a second. I'm going to pull up something to show you, even though this is on your end sort of a podcast.
That's all right.
Um,
Let's do it.
um,
Well, I put it on YouTube, so they'll see
okay.
it.
Okay.
Look at the
Great.
video if they want.
And I will take extra care to
Talk through it. Yeah.
talk through it. So we want to optimize for the things that are meaningful for the business. You talk in the book about obviously KPIs. We talk about the actual sale. And so in e-commerce, it is particularly easy. We know when somebody has added something to the cart. You know when they've looked at the full description. You know when they've added additional items to the cart, or they add something and increase the quantity. And obviously, and ultimately, we know when somebody actually puts their credit card in and says, I want it. And all of these things can be optimized for, right? The
Right.
goal of the e-commerce site would be to sell items, and depending on the kind of product, if it's those direct to consumer subscription boxes, is to that long-term retention of the customer. But so much of people who have started to get involved with digital ads are thinking much more shallow. They're thinking about getting clicks from the ads or getting people to a particular page. And it's a two-edged sword, but Google, Facebook are very, very good at getting people to click on an ad. They're extremely good at getting people to hit a landing page. And in fact, it's too easy. They know who's going to click almost, but that doesn't mean they're really interested in the product. And so Facebook says historically, if you can expose a signal to us, and if we can get 50 of those signals a week, we can optimize for that, and we'll get you more of that. Now, there's a lot of limits, again, post iOS 14 changes, where in the past you could have hundreds of optimization points and use them in different ads. Because of Apple's changes, Facebook now limits that to 8. And if you're doing this kind of deep funnel, where there's a value attached to it, like how much someone purchased or something, they may limit that to, that may count as 4 of the 8. But that's really what we're talking about. Now, when we come to eBusiness, the car dealership, those kinds of things, we can optimize an ad, not for people to click on the ad and look through the cars, but through a Facebook ad, we can optimize that for someone to actually come into the dealership. Company point of sale systems like Square have interfaces, so you can actually optimize your ads for someone to come into your store and hit the POS. So let me, just briefly, we want to talk about the evolution. And as I said, people used to just want to optimize for ad clicks. And what's the click-through rate? Well, it's important to have a good click-through rate, but that wasn't enough. And then we optimized for form fills, between ad fraud that's out there. The form fill is certainly a lot better than a landing page. And you can, in the context of e-commerce, we can think about someone adding to the cart and those kinds of things. But we want to go beyond adding to the cart. We want to get to the actual sale. And so, and this is the hard part. This is the part that brings back your skill set of, sitting between the business and the technology and doing that deep analysis, maybe having some knowledge of statistics. But what is a meaningful event? Can you tell statistically someone who's just browsing and looking at products versus somebody who's really ready to buy? Is it the speed of which they go through? Is it the order that they go through products? For me, a lot of it is just experimental, that you can pick different kinds of things, try optimizing towards those, and see which gives you the best or largest lifetime value.
Right.
But it's finding these meaningful events. And when we get past e-commerce into just e-business, it's thinking about that whole process after the website, after they filled out a form. Do they have a phone call? Well, phone calls are tracked in this customer relationship management system. Maybe a meaningful event is somebody fills out a form and they have a 5-minute conversation with a sales rep.
Right.
That could, other things. And when I was at Birdeye, they use, machine learning to look at dozens of these points to build a lead score. And systems like HubSpot have ways of creating lead scores. So you can combine these in a way, and I'll say the solution to Facebook's limited number of optimization events is to take a market basket of all of these potentially meaningful events, give them a score, put them together, and use that as the signal. If you can only send one signal or two signals, it really needs to be something like a lead score. And I'll get to talking about value, but it's important to the AI, to the machine learning tools at Facebook and Google, that you're not just saying, hey, the event happens, but you give it some sense of how much it's worth, how much you're paying. So in e-commerce, it's very easy. We know what the value of the cart is, and it's very easy to send that. And so if you are doing e-commerce and you're doing ads, it's critical that you set up the appropriate digital plumbing to send the amount of money that somebody has added to the cart, and ultimately the amount of money that they purchase, so that the algorithm can see who is a potentially better partner, not forgetting about ultimately privacy issues. It's just critical for the algorithm. But when we're talking about these events and we're talking about the offline ones, talking to the sales rep on the phone, exchanging emails, coming back and spending more time on the website, watching a video, watching a webinar, downloading an ebook, all of these are potential signals. And so what I'm showing here on the screen right now is sort of the picture that you see normally, the evolution of human from a chimpanzee sort of to upright and walking. But I'm using this to describe sort of this ad optimization evolution. We started with the click, and then the click-through rate, and then landing page views, and then form fills. But then ultimately, we've moved to signups, registering for the site, giving someone your email. But there is something that is next, and this will be, I'll stop here, but I'm showing a centaur, which is a term that machine learning folks like to talk about, the combination of a human and an artificial intelligence. The best player right now in chess is a centaur. It's a human playing along with a computer, not against each other, but as a team. And what I encourage e-commerce folks, e-business folks, is to think of the AIs at Facebook and Google as your partner. But they're very good at what they do, but they have this very narrow field of view, and you need to be able to expose them to the parts that are meaningful for them to do their job, and find interesting things interesting signals, interesting ways of finding an advantage that your competitors haven't thought through. And then ultimately, when all of this is working, you'll find that the cost per lead might go up, but the cost per deal goes down. And I've seen the cost per deal go down by half. And furthermore, the quality of the lead can go up by 20 or 30% based on a score of 0 to 100, sort of, so from an A to a B quality
Right.
lead. And that is ultimately sort of the future, I believe, of e-commerce. But we're going to face a lot of privacy issues, a lot of very reasonable concerns because of the changes that Google and Facebook is making. But there's still ways of doing this the right way for the right reason. But it's where the value is. And the reason that I think it's most valuable is because it gets back to a point you made, John, earlier. It's thinking through the business.
Yeah.
It's actually, what are the meaningful things that we need people to do? Am I aware of my customers and their processes and what they're looking for enough that I can recognize when somebody is a really good potential customer?
Right.
When
That's
we're
the
a good
key performance indicator, right? That's the thing that's key to your business. What are those keys? And that may not be something I emphasize enough in that chapter, but it's what gives you that competitive advantage over your your competitors. But that whatever it is, you need to make sure you're measuring it and that you're excelling at it.
Yeah. And you think about your personas.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you had asked me if I had any feedback on the book. I don't know if you'd like me to. I can give you a couple thoughts if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
It's a great book. You might consider writing a persona for each of the people, each of the roles that you go through.
Yeah.
Both as a way of getting people to understand the persona,
Mm-hmm.
But you could also link it to what they actually buy in real life. So if they were a potential customer, but I think it also might let me see myself in those roles, like what might be a good role for me.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I thought you might want to dive more into the sales funnel terminology, the MQLs, SQLs, those kind of things. Because I think if you get to a reasonably big-sized company, they're going to start throwing out those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even professional long-term marketers get confused by these, and not all companies use them the same way. So I think that's also important, that my MQL may not be your MQL. Then when you got into the system analysts, maybe talking a little bit more about sprints and tickets,
mm-hmm.
Or the process. Every place I've worked has used Jira tickets, but obviously there's many other ticketing systems. But
right.
The hardest thing is, okay, I need this. My boss knows I need it. Everybody knows I need it. Okay, no problem there, Harry. But we've got a lot of other people who need stuff, and we got a limited amount of dev time. And so you need to be able to create a ticket that justifies make the business case.
Right. Yeah.
And, so you talk about all the tracking stuff we were just talking about. Oh, that's all very good. And some of it is experimental, right? I didn't know I'd get a 50% reduction in deal cost until I did it. But you have a hypothesis and you test it. I think that the final piece might be, you do talk about Google My Business, but my experience with Birdeye and Doctible, getting those Google reviews, however you're legitimately getting them, is critical. And a critical piece of software is, and this is really human engineering. You talk about your wife's wine shop or liquor store. You could ask every customer, please leave us a Google review. And most of them are going to say yes. And most of them are just not going to do it because they leave the store and it's out of mind, or where do I go to do that? How do I, and a simple software, whether you create it yourself or use there's literally probably 100 companies out there that sell this kind of software that send somebody a text message and it says, please leave us a Google review. And they pick how many stars, they write their little message, they hit send, and it uses the API just to send it to Google. So it's seamless. And then there is one bit of that that's ethics related, which is Google's policy, and most other companies is you, in the quote olden days, in the early 2010s, people would do something called review gaining. I'd ask you how many stars you give me. If you didn't give me 3 or 4 or 4 or 5, I wouldn't ask you to leave the review. I'd just end it there. But that Google wants you to ask everybody. So, oh, but we're going to get negative reviews. But the reality is, it's better that way. Not only do the reviews come out and are perceived as more authentic because there are a few negative ones. It's not just enough to leave reviews these days, you got to respond to them. And so it's really important for people to see how you respond to a negative review. And then there's a whole area of, I don't know where you are in the research on in sort of traditional management topics, but the service recovery paradox. Is that
I haven't dug too much into that, but I can imagine that would be.
Yeah, it's a very active area of research. But basically, was a theory. Now, they've proven it with quantitative research that if you have 2 customers and one of them has a problem and you recover it to their satisfaction, and that's the measurement, that they're satisfied. Maybe they just wanted an apology, maybe they wanted money, whatever it is, but to their satisfaction, they're going to be more loyal. So getting negative reviews, if you do the right thing, certainly becomes a real value to the business. But more importantly, you can't go into business looking to stick your head in the sand. If one person's going to have a problem and you take the hit of the negative review, you've got to put that back into your business to help improve the business so that someone else doesn't have that problem. And if you're not embracing the reality of your business, you're never going to get from good to excellent. Anyway, that's the end of my soapbox. But
no, a lot of great points. So I love it. I love it, Harry. That was great. So, well, I mean, this has been a great conversation. And I love all the insights you have from your experience. So that's great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I have any more questions for you. So, did you have anything else for me?
I didn't, then I really appreciate your time, and this can be helpful to my students. I will send you a link to some of the service recovery paradox references. So
that'd be great. I'll add it to the show notes. So,
and
for the people that want to read about research, right?
Yeah, well, it's an academic pursuit, but it's a very, very active area of research. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. I'll make sure you get the links to this. If you don't, just email me if you don't see your own recording.
Sounds good. All right, I appreciate it, Harry.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, John. Bye-bye.
Bye.